welcome to this FBH webinar. It's a great pleasure to welcome everyone here with us today. My name is Farida Al-Agami. I'm the General Manager of the Tharawat Family Business Forum and the Co-Director of the Family Business Histories Program. Today, we have the great pleasure of really listening to and experiencing the 100-year family history of the AlBassam family. And we have the great pleasure of having a fantastic keynote speaker with us. Before we go to the conversation, I'll just guide you through a couple of key information pieces about the session as well as about our program. So of course, if you have any challenges, please feel free to reach out to our team and we'll be happy to help you. So what is the Family Business Histories program? It's actually an interesting collaboration between the private sector and academia. It's a collaboration between the Tharawat Family Business Forum and NYU Abu Dhabi. And it's been going on for almost 4 years now. And we have the great privilege really of exploring family businesses from a very, very different angle that perhaps has been neglected a little bit in our region. So what do we do in this project? We are compiling, documenting, and analyzing the history, legacy, and socioeconomic impact of family businesses in the GCC and MENASA region. So obviously sounds like quite a complex thing to do, but essentially what we are trying to understand is the impact of family enterprises on the economic growth of the region and the economic development of the region. And as you can see from this map, obviously family businesses are not an exceptional phenomenon in our region. Really across the world, the private sector is mostly dominated by family enterprises. And our project really has 4 pillars that we try to work on as a team. The first one is to understand the history. We really try to conduct in-depth academic research to kind of try to get a better understanding of the impact of family businesses on the regional economy from a historical perspective. We are also looking to highlight individual legacies. So how have individual families shaped the environment around them, and how are they shaping that? How are they using their history to shape it in the future as well? Obviously, one of the things that is very close to our hearts is also to preserving the heritage. It's obviously very important in our region to make sure that we document what we find and to make sure that we put it to the use of our future generations. And of course, that ends with one of our main goals really is to empower and inspire the future generations with this structured conversation around family enterprises and their historical importance. I'm very happy that the project has really grown over the years, and now you can really follow us on many different platforms. 2 main ones are our website, our webpage, both in Arabic and in English, as well as our LinkedIn page. And you're most welcome to join us and follow us with any updates that come along from the project. One major milestone that we worked on are in-depth case studies, which you're most welcome to download from our website. And I'm very happy to announce that over the next few months, we are working on a more quantitative project and that the research is ongoing at the moment. And hopefully towards the end of the year, we will be able to share more with you about that as well. So without any further ado, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Mr. Abdulrahman AlBassam, who is the Executive Chairman of Aun Enterprises and the CEO of Tilal Real Estate. Welcome, Abdulrahman.
Well, thank you, Farida. It's my pleasure and honor to be here. And after a few years of knowing you and your sisters and your work in Tharawat, I'm looking very much forward to this conversation. Fantastic. And also, if you allow me, I've promised one of my friends, shout out to Nasser Al-Qadi, who's today's his birthday.
Amazing! So happy birthday! Happy birthday from the whole project. Fantastic. And of course, I'd like to also introduce Martin Klimke, Professor Martin Klimke, who is the co-director of our project and the professor at NYU University in Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Martin. Always pleasure to do this together with you.
Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So I see that we have a really fantastic audience here today, and I'd really like to encourage everyone to, share your questions. You have the Q&A button where you can share your questions and your comments, please feel free to do so. We will dive into Abdulrahman's presentation now, so I'll hand over to him for about 25 minutes, and then we will come back, and Martin and I will lead us through a Q&A with Abdulrahman. So feel free to any questions, any ideas that you have, feel free to share them with us. So without any further ado, Abdulrahman, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Farida, again. And I'm conscious of time, I'll just jump right into it. And since we're talking about history and how it inspires innovation and entrepreneurship, I thought of starting the conversation with a story, and the story of a person who is one of my greatest inspirations, and that is Abdulaziz AlBassam, who's my great-grandfather and the founder of our business. So Abdulaziz was born in 1893 in Unayza, and this is a modern picture of Unayza today. Today, it's a small town, relatively speaking, when you compare it to, say, Dammam or Riyadh or Jeddah. But back then, it was really a multicultural small town. One of the travelers back then, he's a Lebanese Parisian. His name is Amin Rayhani, called it the Paris of Najd. When he visited it in the latest 19th century, or the later 19th century. And King Abdulaziz, when he visited the first time, he said, I wish that I see one time the markets of Riyadh to be as vibrant as the markets of Unayza. So he was born into a city that is about business and trade and merchandise. And specifically, he was born into a family that is known particularly in business. So the Bassam family, AlBassam family, is on record their business goes back to 260, almost 260 years, where we have documented trades of the AlBassam family, and a unique thing about my family, and I'm so, look, I'm not encouraged to speak about it as freely as now, but I know that we are in a educational environment, and therefore these things are a must to be told. So the AlBassam family is a large family, and you have number of family businesses coming out of Unayza. But one thing in particular relative to AlBassam is that you have a number of family businesses that came out of the same family, as opposed to other families where you have one particular family house or a business house in that family. In AlBassam, it's you have numerous of them. So Abdulaziz was born into this family, and I'm sure back then in his early age, he listened to the stories of his cousins, people who are established in Egypt, in the Levant, Iraq, in India, as far as Calcutta. So the other side of India, and so you have a few examples here. Muhammad AlBassam, for example, Muhammad Abdullah AlBassam is one of the most known in the Levant and Iraq region. He's the founder of a toll road back then between Baghdad and Damascus, so two capitals of the Arab world. He, as you can see here, he acquired a gold mine concession in Iraq, and this is Sulaiman Abdullah in Mecca. He was a very well-known person in Mecca, wearing the Meccan turban and sitting with the Amir of Hajj back then during the Ottoman Empire. So I'm sure he learned of the stories of these people. Same thing goes with Mr. Saleh AlBassam, who is also a great grandfather, the second person to the right, he's the founder of the original Shmagh AlBassam, which is what I'm wearing today. And in Saudi Arabia, for example, if you saw someone wearing this red shmagh on his head, it's very likely that the AlBassam family stamp will be on it, as you can see in the picture. So he was the founder of that brand, and later on expanded by others. And AlBassam family have today, they have a museum in Unayza. The main museum in Unayza is AlBassam House. So a house of part of the family transformed into a museum. And today you can visit it, and it's called House Beit AlBassam. So he was born into this family, and when he was at the age of 9, that's when the reunification of Saudi Arabia started to happen. And at that time, it was a difficult time, of course, because it was a time of war. And my family was also caught into this. So in 1902, Abdulaziz's family have lost everything. Born into a rich family, but at the age of 9, they've lost everything. His father took him to Mecca to try his luck. And for 2 years, he came back to Unayza with empty hands and more debt, in fact. So Abdulaziz, being the eldest of his children, and he was at 11 at that time, 11 years old, he had to leave. He had to travel to look for sustenance and work. And so his travels took him to Iraq and to Kuwait. He witnessed many things during this trip. One of which he lost his a close friend in a fire. And from Kuwait he rode the sea, and that was the first time he encounters the sea. And he arrived in Bahrain. And in Bahrain back then, Bahrain was the center of the Gulf in terms of trade, and the markets of Bahrain are completely different than what he used to see in Unayza. You have even more multicultural people around in the market. You have Persians, you have Indians, and so it's a very inspiring environment. And he found a job. He worked in that job for a couple of years, being a person who knows how to read and write and a little bit of math and so on. He was not like his let's say counterparts, where you have them working as labor or carriers or that whoever arrives in Bahrain would work in that such nature, jobs of that nature. No, he worked in an office, and he was good at it, but he didn't like that job, and he was looking for a new job until he found himself at the presence of Mr. Yusuf bin Ahmed Kanu. And at that time, Yusuf was the most prominent tradesman or businessman in Bahrain, with numerous investments across different sectors, from pearling to shipping to commodities and so on. And he loved this person. He loved him very much. He saw him as a mentor and inspiration, and he worked for him for a few years. And it's interesting, one of the funny stories how he landed that job with Yusuf is that he told that story to my family, is when he was sitting, he used to come early to the market, open the office for his boss, and he would sit there, and he's just bored sitting there. And every day Yusuf would walk in, and when he walks in, he have this kind of aura around him. A person of his grandeur will create a scene in the market every single day. So he was inspired by this man, and when he walked into the market, he saw an owl sitting at the door of his office. So he felt omened, a bad omen from that owl, and he stood up, and he wasn't happy about it. So Abdulaziz caught that an opportunity to speak to Yusuf, and he told him, "Sir, do you want me to kill that owl for you?" And he said, "Yes, So Abdulaziz picked up a gun from the market, and he said, this is the first time I ever shoot this gun, and he pointed at the owl and he killed it at the very moment from the first shot. That got him into a conversation with Yusuf Kano, and where are you from, what are you doing, and so on. And all of a sudden he got a job with Yusuf Kano, and he remembers after all these years of hardship how he was so happy with a private room and a private washroom, and he was very happy with this big change after so many years of hardship. So he worked for Yusuf for many years, learned for him a lot until 1914, circa 1914, when he opened his own business in commodities and trading. And he worked there for 10 years from his home until in 1924, when the government called him in and summoned him and said, who are you? What are you? Who is Abdulaziz AlBassam? We're seeing your name topping the customs of the port of Manama, and we don't know you. So you see this one of these lists where you have Abdulaziz sitting at first or second in these lists. And they said, where are you operating from? He said, from my house. So they said, no, you have to open a CR, and you've become a proper business. That's when he opened his CR, first CR in 1924, and making it into a real business. Now, as you can see in this list, for example, this is an example of when I told you the AlBassam family have different households within it of trade. So you can see off this list, you have families from Aneza, but AlBassam, you see them in 3-4 names at the same list. So there are 3 different businesses going around in the same time. But Abdulaziz Ali is sitting at the second. Back then, he was 31 years old. So he was one of the youngest merchants in Bahrain, but quite the most established in just 10 years. This is one of his earliest pictures. And this is one of his earliest business cards, where you have, as you can see, only 4 numbers for the telephone. Back then, the pearling industry was the industry in Bahrain. It was the oil of Bahrain, and it was also fashionable. There was no diamonds back then. Nobody knew diamonds in the 20s. Everybody knew pearls, and this is Coco Chanel, for example, in the 20s, where she's showing off her pearls, and that was quite common in the fashion of the West. So there was a lot of industry going around the pearling business, and Bahrain was the main exporter for natural, great quality pearls. And pearling was the business of the elite back then. So you see Yusuf Kano is to the far right of the picture. You have also Miqbil Khair, the second person from the left, who is also from Aneza, by the way. And he was the main man in the pearl industry at that time. In the middle, that's Cartier, who comes to Bahrain and sorts out the pearls at that time. So he sits with the elite back then in this business. The interesting thing is Abdulaziz, even though that was the business of the elite, he did not invest in pearls. At the other side of the world, Mr. Mikimoto Kokichi, who is also a jeweler himself, found out a way to cultivate pearls. And he cultivated pearls in the thousands. And in order to show off his power of cultivating perfect circular spherical pearls, he, in a show in 1926 in the US, he presented the Liberty Bell, which is a famous piece in the US, a replica of it, entirely made of pearls, to show that I have abundance of pearls, and not just pearls, but perfect pearls. That shocked the pearl industry to its demise. It disappeared in a matter of years, and no longer the business existed, and many people disappeared with it. Many businessmen disappeared with it. The interesting thing is Abdulaziz did not go there at all. What he did instead is he became a bullion, which means he invests in gold, and he was the agent of Swiss Bank Gold, 24 carats. What do you call them? Like these pieces of gold, and he was the main agent of that gold. And it was interesting that he made that choice, because gold back then in the 20s, the First World War was already done, and gold wasn't doing well because everybody's safe. But he invested in gold, and he made that was one of his best decisions that he ever made in his life. The other thing that interesting decision that he made back in the 40s and 50s is he invested in real estate, which was back then, and you're talking about 40s and 50s. Back then it was considered spending money on sand. Why would someone buy real estate? It's not the right thing to do. And he was, negatively looked into it. Why are you doing this? Why are you buying real estate? So you can see him in the middle here in one of his estates in Bahrain. And that was another great decision that he made that was not with the norm. So I believe that Abdulaziz, who is in the left-hand side of this picture, was an entrepreneur by every sense of the manner. Of the word, and he's here with his son-in-law, Abdulrahman. He's my grandfather, and my uncle and my aunt, who are his grandchildren. Abdulaziz passed away in 1976 in Egypt, known for his entrepreneurship, but also his luck in business and his integrity, and his many stories can be told about him. And he was buried. He was taken to Mecca. His funeral was done in the Grand Mosque of Mecca and buried in Mecca, which is also something of an interesting story to be told, because he was supposed to go to Bahrain, not Mecca. But he inspired me, and I've learned a lot of that story, and I became researching modern history of Saudi Arabia and the story of Abdulaziz Al-Ali. Because he inspired me a lot. This is one of my TEDx talks, and I've told the story of Abdulaziz Al-Ali, part of my TED talk. I've also written a book, just recently finished it. It's a fiction, but it's based on true events, and it's based primarily on the story of Abdulaziz Al-Ali. And just speaking about it, I'm actually looking for help in editing and publishing this book, because it's written for the Western audience. So if someone can help me with that, I'll be very much appreciative. But he also inspired not just his children, he inspired other people. One of the interesting people who came and approached us 2 years ago was Ahmed Al-Eidi, who is a researcher in the Qasim University. And he chose Abdulaziz Al-Ali to write his thesis. And that was very interesting to me, because Abdulaziz Al-Ali passed away in 1976. So there are many other figures, very well-known figures, even in an AlBassam family, that he could do his research on, but he chose Abdulaziz Al-Ali. And his main reason was he saw the name popping up in all the archives that he dealt with, be it in UK, in Damascus, in the Ottoman archive, in India, and that intrigued him. Who is Abdulaziz Al-Ali? So he finished his research last year. He got his degree, and today, just a couple of days ago, I knew that he published a book based on that research about Abdulaziz AlBassam as an example of Najdi traders and businessmen in Bahrain. So that story inspired me to start a company in 2009 called Dawn Enterprises with my wife, who comes also from a family business, Tamimi Group, and from a very inspiring story as well, which is the story of her grandfather Ali Tamimi, an entrepreneur by all sense of the word. And since then, we've tried to inspire our team, and our team grew into different sectors, and these are just pictures of our team members in different sectors of the business. Finally, I was a part, and thankfully part of being in the experience of consorting an alliance of family businesses in Tilal Real Estate Development Company, which is formulated by the families of Al-Tamimi, Al-Qabbani, and Al-Uthman. I'm also a member of the board in the Eastern Chamber of Commerce. Finally, this is a picture of my great-grandfather Abdulaziz, my grandfather Abdulrahman, and then my father, who's currently running the family business, Abdulrahman AlBassam Awlada, Abdulrahman AlBassam Sons company, and myself. And just a couple of days ago, an interesting thing, my father was one of the first people to arrive at the room where my grandfather have passed away, Abdulaziz, in Egypt. And he says that the last words he ever wrote with his pen was وَهَذَا حَدِّ النَّصِيب, which is a word that he writes in business letters. And it's very ironic because the word, when you translate, it actually translates to, and that is the end of my share. So it's very interesting that this person, even at the last moment of his death, was inspiring. And I wanted to share the story with you guys, because if we're talking about family business and inspiring innovation and entrepreneurship, Abdulaziz AlBassam is a great example that I'm very proud of sharing with you guys. And I really thank you at this point to allow me. I hope I haven't taken so much time, but hopefully I've given like a nice story to start with.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful story, and we're very, very honored, that you were able to share it with us. And thanks so much for these wonderful images. It was really like a time travel, for us to go through these wonderful history. No, I'm very, very grateful, that you were able to share this with us. And your family and your family's business history is, of course, a wonderful example of these rich legacies that today's family firms are grounded in, and especially reflective, as you so nicely laid out, of the regional dynamics, the regional histories, the interwoven histories, between the various parts of the business, especially when you mentioned Pearl. I was just maybe wanted to kick it off with a broader question to say, do you think we're having the right conversation to understand these legacies today? There's oftentimes, the sense that this world has gotten so complicated, whereas seemingly the past seems to be, so simple at the time. But, you have done your historical research here. How do we understand these legacies today, and what do they mean in your view to the current generation, of business people and entrepreneurs?
Well, I don't know if I can answer, are we having the right conversations? But I can tell you my opinion of what is the right conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the right conversations in dealing with family legacies and as such is we focus a lot on the year of establishment, for example, with family businesses, and we try to push this year as far in history as possible. And that's for a good reason, because it tells how much that company survived so many challenges and grew all over these years. And it's absolutely an important thing to figure out when was exactly the company was established. But we're looking at this also maybe primarily driven by pride or by, let's say, being proud of this achievement. Where in fact, I think a main thing that needs to be discussed is the responsibility that comes with it. So that the earlier the company have started, the more responsibility on your part to take it forward and making it survive for another 100 years. And that is a main area that I think a conversation should take place. Another thing that I think we've in own enterprises, for example, we've dealt with is how can you have such a family legacy inspiring non-family members in the business. And that's very important conversation to have, because
that's right.
You can, I myself, I can be inspired and because I'm related to this person, but how can this person inspire non-family members? And this is an actual question that we've been through when we grew to become a larger company than when we started. And one way to do this is by telling stories. And I think that stories nowadays are extremely underrated. I mean, as human beings, I think that the main way of conveying a message is a story. And even if you look at startups, forget legacies. If you look at a startup, the main way of catching the attention of an investor is by telling a story, and perhaps the story of founding that startup, even though it was done 6 months ago. And I think that's what, truly one part of the conversation that needs to be taken place.
I think that's fascinating, Abdulrahman, and thank you so much for these kind of very, clear words about this very complex relationship actually between the past and the future. Because very often in Tharawat, we see that the past can sometimes be perceived as a little bit of a burden as well, because you have these larger than life figures who have basically outperformed everybody around them, and when you're related to them, it can also create a sense of pressure and a sense of fear or anxiety that are you going to be the one who's not going to live up to this standard? And I think part of the conversation should be to kind of reflect on these ideas of how does this influence our day-to-day. So, is it a positive thing to have 100-year legacy? Is it a pressure point? And perhaps you could speak a little bit to, how does it influence decision-making? Because obviously you take different decisions if you deal with a 100-year-old company or with an 18-month-old company. Your kind of sense of responsibility is probably very, very different. Could you comment to that a little bit?
Well, I have a kind of a peculiar, let's say, situation here, because I'm not involved currently in the family business. I'm involved in my own enterprises, but I can tell you how does that legacy influences my day-to-day decisions or my day-to-day business, going through my day. And look, legacies, family businesses, family legacies comes with its perks. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. My personal experience, for example, is if I introduce myself to a person and I tell my name, one of the main reactions was, well, he judges me in a positive way immediately. He puts me in a certain positioning, and he tells, well, oh, this means that he's a trustworthy person. He's a business-worthy person. He's a partnership-worthy person. So that's a perk. Let's not kid ourselves. When you start off with in your first impression with just mentioning your name, that is a great privilege that you have. But on the other side, what you've said, it comes with a great burden. And a huge burden, in fact, because you don't want to disappoint, you don't want to fail, you don't want to be the person who gives the family the bad name. And that is huge, a huge restriction when making decisions and so on. So one thing that this might affect my decision, for example, I wouldn't say in a bad way, but I need to look and be aware of as I make that decision, is when emotions comes into a decision, a hard decision that I have to make, be it closing a business or closing a venture, for example, or stopping a bleed in a certain losing project. And that's areas where I personally find a little bit difficulty dealing with it as a person who don't want to fail, who don't want to be the person who does that and maybe stain that image, right? but I'm aware of it, and I grew, and I'm maturing as we speak, and it's a learning journey. But it is something that I am aware of and deal with on a day-to-day reality.
I mean that go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that ambivalence is very, very interesting, obviously, because on the one hand, that is being perceived as something of a responsibility, you know, that you're going to be held accountable, you know, for essentially managing the family name moving forward, and, you know, the legacy, that you're part of that legacy. On the other hand, you know, we're wondering, how do you draw inspiration, you know, from that? Because one of the arguments that we're starting to see, you know, when speaking to many of these family businesses that have that rich legacy, that rich history, how do you use it in situations of crisis, in situations of challenges, when you are faced with hard decisions, to draw inspiration on? And this is why I like your earlier point that you were making about us being, you know, very focused on the founding years and then on these larger of life figures, and not often times focusing enough on the in-between, where there is precisely a similar hardship and struggle and failure as well, but that's oftentimes not in the forefront. So how does that help you, you know, being a historian and a researcher, you know, of your family businesses, you know, history, help you in your day-to-day with your own company or in general?
Well, the history is rich of examples of what you've said, challenges that were overcome. And that is at the level of the founder, at the level of the company, and even at the level of the country, and in general, in terms of economics. And I think that the main way of conveying a certain experience and learning from it is through telling a story. You go back and you see how a founder or a leader of a business, or even a leader of a country, deals with a certain crisis and comes out of it. And as I said, we're not giving it the attention that it deserves. It's, for example, in my culture, we're reading is not a particular, let's say, hobby that is. Although it's very increasing nowadays, it's amazing how book festivals nowadays are performing. But in general, it's not a habit like you see in the West, for example. But truly, it's how you go through these stories and you convey them and you retell them to your members of the organization.
I think that's really fascinating, and so we have very interesting and complex questions from the audience. So I'll get started with summarizing maybe one or two of them. So obviously you've explained to us, Abdulrahman, that obviously the AlBassam family by itself has a lot of branches and is very diverse in terms of its business activities. So what's the relationship between these different branches? You know, how do you make sure, or is there an effort to try and make sure that next generation members, you know, have a common understanding of their identity, of where they come from, or is it more on a case-to-case basis?
No, in our case, actually, talking about the family business specifically, the AlBassam Sons family company, no, we're not very actually diverse operationally. We don't have number of entities. We act more of an investment house. Okay. And that obviously makes it an easier as a job. And quite frankly, this is how a business evolves. As a family business, usually it dissects itself from the operations and becomes an investment house. That's the best way of moving forward and making this business continuing and keeping the operations with the professionals. Now, in terms of the AlBassam family, when I mentioned different branches and whatnot, these are entirely different businesses with entirely different owners. And that's what's unique about it is that it's a large family, but you have different, completely different family businesses under that name. So I'll give you an example. You have a business that are very well known in schools. That's prominent here in the Eastern Province. You have a business that invented the Al-Fajr watch, which is a watch that gives adhan on a time. Very famous watch, started off in Bahrain. You have contractors, you have Salt and Parker's amazing restaurants in Dubai. And those are entirely separate structures, separate ownership, but they follow the same, I think, the same overarching legacy.
Very interesting. One more question, Martin, before I hand it back over to you. I feel people are competing, asking you questions, Abdulrahman. One other question we have received is a very interesting one. Maybe like the role of women in your family. Is there anything that, you know, remains from their influence on the different generations that have built your family business?
Well, in own enterprises, for example, no, women, we started off with being 50 between man and a woman, but I think we have a very integrated organization, definitely. In AlBassam, because we don't have much positions in the AlBassam Sons, because again, it's a family office rather. We don't have as many, we don't have, let's say, family member females in the business. But I think looking at my own experience and my sisters and how they pursued their own careers and let's say their dreams, I grew in a family that actually did not look at women in the traditional stereotypical way at all. And I think that's very old in our family. One of the most famous women in Saudi Arabia is Modi AlBassam, who is celebrated today as a nationwide figure. And she lived in the early 1900s. So she's a very old figure. She owned her own business. So that's back then. So I think that, again, I am privileged by being born to my father and my mother who did not see this kind of difference. They left it to the children to decide.
Yeah, very interesting.
It's very interesting that you sort of put such a strong emphasis on the sense of belonging, the inclusion, of non-family members, and of really trying to, inspire people to be part of a larger community that is purpose-driven and is sort of, shaped by the legacy. So that I do feel is a very interesting feature. From your own experience, what would you recommend to families who have or happen to have potentially these rich histories, and could have, a similar story to tell, but who do not have a strong bond with their history just yet? What would be your advice?
Well, I think that truly is a challenge, and especially with businesses that are on the third generation, completely, let's say, detached physically from the founder, and we have quite a lot of them in our region. And I don't know, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's always come back to stories. It always come back to research. And this is my advice: research your own founders, research your own leaders within the business family, and you will find interesting stories to be told and interesting case studies of challenges that were overcome and opportunities that were taken advantage of, and weaknesses that have been erased, that doesn't exist today, and you're taking it, you're taking your strengths as for granted. Where in fact, if you research, you see how those strengths were weaknesses transformed into strengths, and it goes back to this story, because the story is how you understand things, but it's also how to convey the message to others. and that's predates even the, I would say, the industrial age of thousands of years ago. This is how people this is how people exchange experiences.
It's so interesting because it kind of links into the question that was asked by one of our audience members about how do you make sure you preserve that story? Because obviously, like you said, before you can tell a story, you need to understand its elements. And I think there is a danger in our generation that because our level of conversation or the time that we spend together is disrupted by technology, by distraction, that the quality of the stories probably is impacted. So how do you make sure in your own family that you document that heritage and that you make sure it remains accessible to the family?
Well, in our experience, we were lucky, pure and simple. There was no intention of keeping any record except very few. My father, for example, is a very record keeping guy, and he kept very interesting documents. But that's it. And really, a lot of documents were found at a later stage, and I say we're lucky because we have someone, Ahmed Al-Eidi, who is completely unrelated, completely detached, has nothing to do with the AlBassam family, who popped up out of existence and said, I want to document every single fact about your family. And look, you have biographies of very interesting people. But this guy, what he did is he produced an academic paper. So that's documentation at the highest levels, and that's pure luck. That's pure, absolute pure luck. And perhaps this goes back to the person himself, Abdulaziz Al Ali. He must have done something amazing in his life. He must have done something right in his life that after 40, 50 years of his demise, people still remember him. And this is one thing that really inspired me myself when we receive people, for example, in Eid Majlis, right? When you have grown men cry, remembering Abdulaziz Al Ali, and I've seen this as a child, I've seen it with my own two eyes, that person must have done something.
Something right.
You know? And I've seen this. This is not a second-hand experience. It's my own personal experience.
And you know, it really also links into this question of how do we motivate next generation members to have a positive relationship with the family business? Because, you know, we keep seeing this research that millennials and Gen Zs need purpose. They need to be driven by more than money or by more than the prestige of having a certain position. They want to belong to something. And I think that there is a huge opportunity here to kind of make that bridge, you know, between these stories. And as you said very, very correctly, I think it's the personal aspect, it's the genuine aspect of a human to human story that kind of can contribute to creating that purpose and that, you know, contribution as well. Just one question that I find quite interesting, maybe, and then we can start closing the session slowly, is in terms of governance, do you have a structure as a family business to kind of also specifically with the view of integrating and maintaining relationships between the next generation? As you said, now third generation is a difficult situation. So how do you deal with that in your core family business?
So let me just quickly go back to your to the previous question, because I forgot to answer it. Really, I gave you my personal experience, but I did not answer your question. How can we do the documentation? And I think the main thing is if you don't have documents, you can start today. And I think one of the things that are very interesting that's going on in the West, but we don't have in our region, is journaling. And I see great benefit in journaling. I admit I don't do this quite often, but I would love to have the time and do journaling on every single day. Write those notes, because 100% they will be of benefit in the coming
in the future.
In the future. But here's the thing: some people don't have, maybe they don't have legacies. right? Maybe they have a bad legacy, for example, and that's absolutely fine. That's in fact, when you don't have a legacy, or you're starting off with a bad legacy. And I imagine, for example, let's say Hitler. If Hitler had a son who survived, how could he deal with his life, right? That's a bad legacy to deal with. And I think, yeah, right. So if you don't have a legacy, or you have a negative legacy per se, I think that's where the legacy is born, right? Yeah. And you start your own legacy, and imagine it like look, the ripe fruit that fell from the tree, that's the one that gets picked up. Yeah. And perhaps it will be challenged and eaten and enjoyed, but perhaps there are seeds, and these seeds might find themselves in the ground, and with nature and nurture and a bit of luck, there comes another tree, and all of a sudden you have a legacy of your own.
Well, right? I think this is a very interesting kind of segue to the last audience question that we have here about transition. And the topipic obviously.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah. I like enthusiasm. Go ahead.
Because I don't want to ignore. I don't want to ignore your question regarding the governance.
Yes.
Yeah, you asked me what are we doing in terms of governance. So yes. we are a fourth generation at this stage. So the business is led by my father at this point. And he's a third generation, and that's where things get difficult.
Yeah.
So we are at this point in a very interesting transitional phase where my father is a little bit letting go and bringing in the second generation, and we're doing the governance for the second phase of our business. And I'm very confident, based on the conversations that I've been into in the past few months in that ordeal. It's very interesting what's going on at the moment in our business. Yes,
absolutely. Well, thank you. It links to the last question I wanted to mention to you about it's maybe a bit of a philosophical question in a way. What makes your family able to stay together for this long? Because I can see we have a lot of Tharawat members on the call today, and I think it's an intriguing question. When you're a second or maybe a third generation family business, to learn from you, what are the ingredients do you think that has led your family to make to sustain for such a very long time?
Look, it's not. Look, statistically speaking, when the business goes to a third generation, that's when family businesses dissolve. And it is no question. It is a challenge. There is no doubt. There is existential questions that comes along, because it's not anymore brothers dealing with each other. It's cousins dealing with each other. So different families all together forming a part. I think two main things: having an open, transparent conversation within the family, and having the family being strongly tied to their family ethics and family values and family connection, and how family is first. This kind of glue keeps things together, right? But the other thing is understanding the challenge and not fooling yourself that it's not a challenging period or stage in your business, and setting goals, especially in governance, and moving towards closed stock companies rather than LLCs, going through separation between ownership and managerials and execution, and thirdly, having the second, the parallel governance to the business governance, which is the family charter and how to manage problems between the family. And we have very good examples to learn from. AlZamil family is a great example of how they did that. They're there are very big, numerous owners of the same business, but they've went well through that experience. I heard of Al-Fawzan just recently, Mr. Abdullah Al-Fawzan, in one of his interviews back in Ramadan, which he spoke of an amazing experience in his family, and we have a lot to learn.
Amazing, thank you. Over to you, Martin.
Oh no, I'm just very, very pleased to hear your passionate plea for the power of stories, and this is obviously as a historian a delight for me to hear that advocacy. But I also firmly believe in the fact that the stories of the human condition, the human journey, will be inspiring in all their complexity, both good and bad, to current and future generations. And one of our aims, obviously, with webinars like these and our work in the family business histories is precisely illuminating these particular stories, to a larger audience, and bringing the region, to life in that particular conversation, also vis-a-vis other Western examples, and really truly boosting that particular number of stories, and illuminating their diversity and their transnational character, as we heard today, that they're essentially not bound by national boundaries, and that people are seeking their luck and seeking to provide for their families through their entrepreneurial journeys. So thanks so much from my end for sharing with us such an inspiring story.
Absolutely. Also from my end, Abdulrahman, as usual, it's been a pleasure, and I would like to kind of give you the word to close the session. What's next for you? What is the outlook, and what are some of the parting words that you would like to give us?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope that I did not, brought myself as someone who speaks of his family and so on, but that's an education, let's say, workshop, and someone has to touch the specific points very specifically. So I really thank the audience for allowing this, as well as you. And I think to close with a certain statement, I think that a person who is ready to take any challenge must have, I think, 5 characteristics. One is he needs to be positive, but at the same time patient for his now. He needs to be optimistic, but grounded for his future. And he needs to have a vision. He needs to be a person of a vision, because the world makes way for those who know where they're going. And I think that's a statement that I learned throughout I put it together throughout my experience, and I always remind myself of these 5 characteristics.
Well, thank you so much. I would say that you've literally just inspired me. So I will definitely remember those 5 characteristics, and remind myself as well, and our teams, that, if we want to change things, if we want to improve our lives and the lives of the people around us, that this is how we have to behave and how we have to mold the world around us. So thank you so much, Abdulrahman. And also thank you to our audience, who've been amazing, for the beautiful questions. And of course, we will keep you up to date with further series updates from FBH. And we hope to see everyone again. So thank you very much, and all the very best to you, Abdulrahman. Thank you, Martin, as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.